Hey guys, today's podcast with Chris Hodges, he's the senior pastor of the Church of the Highlands in Alabama, is presented by the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network. We have a network of shows all available to listen to, different types of shows too. We have a show hosted by baseball players, a show hosted by a baseball player and his wife, a show hosted by an NFL player's wife, and of course this show. But our newest show that I really want to tell you about for a second here is called Sports Spectrum's Inside the Chapel. And it just launched a couple of weeks ago. It's hosted by the Denver Broncos team chaplain, Reza Zadeh, and the Houston Rockets team chaplain in the NBA, Ike Soma. And this show is designed to bring to you the messages that these team chaplains share with their players. So the role of a team chaplain, each week they put together a message, especially in the NFL, and they share a chapel service, kind of like a church service, a message, a sermon with those players. And I thought, man, that would be great to put into a podcast form. Let's get a sneak peek behind the curtain on the messages that these players are hearing from the team chaplains. And so that's what this podcast is, Inside the Chapel. It is the messages that different team chaplains in all realms of sports are sharing with their athletes. And you're going to get to hear those each time, every episode of Sports Spectrum's Inside the Chapel. It's going to be one of those shows that you're going to want to bring a pen and a paper to, take notes. You may even listen to it together with a group of people. But I'm excited for this. I'm really pumped for you to hear Inside the Chapel, a new podcast from Sports Spectrum, available everywhere podcasts are found or at sportspectrum.com.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
And welcome to the show. I am Jason. This is Sports Spectrum. So glad you tuned into our show today. We appreciate you for listening, for checking us out. Make sure you check out our website, sportspectrum.com, for all of our content, podcasts, articles, devotionals, all available for free over at sportspectrum.com. We got a great conversation today with Chris Hodges. He is the senior pastor of the Church of the Highlands in Alabama. If you are in Alabama, you know about the Church of the Highlands. Under Chris's leadership, it's launched campuses all across the state of Alabama and has grown to more than 60,000 people attending Church of the Highlands weekly. He's also an author, and he has a new book out on a very important topic. It's called Out of the Cave, Stepping into the Light When Depression Darkens What You See. We go into Chris's depression story and also talk about the book and why it's important to read a book like this and to help talk about something like depression as believers in the church. It's so important. It is out there. People are going through it right now. And I'm so glad that we're going to have this conversation with Chris. Now, we are going to talk sports as well. Right at the top of the podcast here, we have some fun conversations about his love for LSU, as well as his love for the game of golf. And having played golf recently with Nick Saban, Chris Hodges, he played pretty well. So lots of fun stories about sports. Then we get into a really important topic on depression. Chris Hodges is our guest here today on Sports Spectrum. Let's take a listen. Pastor Chris, welcome to Sports Spectrum. How are you?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. This is going to be fun. I can't wait.
This is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to start with the lighter side of things first,
Okay.
and then we'll talk about your book, Out of the Cave. Let's talk about sports first. And you and I, thankfully, had a little bit of a banter before we started, and I already heard 2 or 3 stories that I want you to share and tell on the show. But the first thing I heard, a little birdie kind of whispered to me that you were a big LSU fan. And you're in Alabama, so that dynamic must be quite interesting.
It's very interesting. In fact, yeah, I went to LSU. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge.
Okay.
You know, once a Tiger, always a Tiger. I'm big friends with Coach O. He's a great friend of ours, and so I'm a diehard LSU fan who was sent by God to Alabama to plant a church. And honestly, Jason, it's probably to the wisdom of God that I'm not an Alabama or Auburn fan, because it's about 50-50.
Mm.
And if I was one or the other, I don't think they could take it. They hate each other that much. I mean, it's a real rivalry. So I think it's in the wisdom of God that I'm something other than Auburn or Alabama.
That's amazing. And especially I like how you said God orchestrated it for me to come to Alabama, because you wouldn't have done that if it was in your hands, right?
No. It was 20 years ago. I was really, actually, it's in the book. It was the only time, well, now it's the second time that I've actually gone through a really battle with depression.
Mm.
And in 2000, our church was in a beginning of the year prayer effort. And I really got what I believe is what we call an open vision. I saw myself ministering in this church that I had planted. And I talked to my pastor who I was working for about it. And he said these words. He said, stay here until God gives you supernatural love for a city. And I said, well, how do you find supernatural love? And so we ended up taking our vacation time in 2000 to go look at cities that I thought I could live the rest of my life in. And Birmingham was on the list because we were going to the SEC baseball tournament every year to watch LSU. I don't know if people remember back in the 90s, though, LSU, won 5 out of 10 national championships. They really owned the 90s with Coach Skip Bertman. And so anyway, I was a huge LSU baseball fan, and it was sports that got me to Birmingham 20 years ago.
Wow. So you see, God can use sports to bring people the gospel. That's what we are about here at Sports Spectrum. And it's clearly what happened with you, Chris Hodges. I understand you're a big golfer as well. And you recently had golf with a pretty big name, but you were the one that kind of came out and said, look, I can do this thing. Check me out.
Yeah. So I'm a very big golfer. I started playing golf at LSU at 19, and I just, it's my sport. And so I have the privilege of playing at some very great places. In fact, I just got back from Oakmont that's hosted 9 U.S. Opens, and it was an incredible experience. And we have an Augusta member in our church who takes me there usually every year. And so I've been able to play that incredible golf course. And so I dearly, dearly love the game. I'm getting older, so my handicap is going up. I used to be a 2 or 3. Now I'm a 7 or 8. But just recently I had the privilege of playing in a foursome with probably the most famous living golf architect, Tom Fazio, and his wife, Sue, and also with Coach Nick Saban, to open a brand new golf course in the mountains of North Carolina called High Hampton. Okay. And I was asked, I don't even know why, but I was asked to be in this foursome to literally hit some of the very first shots that would ever be hit on this golf course. And there's back-to-back par 3s on the front 9, number 5 and number 6. And number 6 backs up to this little Methodist church. They call it the church hole. And so anyway, it was 164 yards. I hit an 8-iron with a little soft draw, hit the green. And Coach Saban says, Chris, I can't see it anymore. It's not on there. And I don't play with my glasses on, and I can't see. I'm nearsighted, so I can't see far. And I said, you don't see it? So I actually thought it rolled off the back of the green. And we got up there, nothing on the green, and Coach Saban ran over to the hole, and sure enough, the ball was in the hole. And the pastor makes a hole-in-one. Wait a minute, the LSU pastor makes a hole-in-one on the church hole with the Alabama head football coach, and nothing is sweeter, Jason. Nothing was sweeter.
On the church hole, the pastor makes a hole-in-one. Oh my gosh, you can't write that, right? You can't even write.
You really
that
can't write.
That's amazing.
And Fazio went crazy. I mean, he designed the golf course, and he just went nuts. He just thought it was the greatest thing ever. So,
you got the ball right, I presume.
Of course, yeah.
You got to put up on the mantle.
Oh, absolutely. I had both those guys sign it, and so yeah, it's a keeper. That's hole-in-one number 7 for me.
How about that?
Yeah. How about that? So
that means golf is a serious sport if you got 7 hole-in-ones, Chris.
No, I love the game. I really love the game. What I love about it is the guy like me that's not very athletic can actually still be good at it. And I still beat my boys most of the time. So it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. He is Chris Hodges. He's joining us here on Sports Spectrum. You also mentioned to me before we started on the unique relationship with Tua and the fact that you were with him, the Miami Dolphins quarterback, during the NFL draft. And I think the draft, that was the 2020 draft. So that was the quarantine draft where everybody was home. Nobody was at New York or Vegas or wherever they might have the draft, Tennessee and other places. But what was that experience like, and kind of watching Tua grow? And he's such a humble young man in all the different places that I've seen him and the different people that I know that know him. And it was fun to watch him get some playing time last year and play decently well for a team that was, playing well. What was that experience like for you, kind of watching a kid in essence have his dreams fulfilled.
Yeah, actually, our church played a role in even in his recruitment. The coaches that were trying to get him to choose Alabama knew he was a Christian and really, really loved God, and actually brought him to our church. And he says that was one of the things. Of course, it wasn't the only thing, but it was one of the things that helped him make his decision. The entire family moved from Hawaii to Alabama, and they're still in our church. There's some precious people, and I love them dearly. And so before the pandemic, they actually asked me, it was going to be in Vegas that year, the draft. And they asked me to be actually one of the few who could be in his little entourage on the night that his name would be called. And when the pandemic hit, they still wanted me to be a part of the experience. So I did this Zoom prayer meeting with them, and it was a very special moment. And ESPN and all those covered this moment, and it was pretty cool. But no, they're a special family. They really love the Lord. He has an amazing talent, but he's very, very humble, loves God, loves people. And I'm just honored to know these very, very special people.
Yeah. As a pastor of a very large church, and when you have people like a Tua that attend your church, right? How do you as a leader kind of create a space where they can come to church, just like everybody would want to go to church and experience a time to worship with God, but also knowing that they're going to get a lot of people pulling at them or talking to them or wanting their time when they really just want to come to church? I remember talking to another pastor who pastored a church who had a quarterback, a pretty famous NFL quarterback, come to his church. And he said, listen, I don't want to treat him any differently, but I understand that I don't want him to be distracted from experiencing what every other person should be coming to church to experience. And that is the opportunity to witness or worship, I should say, with God. What has that been like for you over the years? And you mentioned before we talked a lot of different people that have come to your church and come through your church. What's that like to kind of lead as a pastor in a church where you have some famous people coming and you want them to experience church like a normal person?
Yeah, it's actually a very good question. And I think actually our size somewhat insulates them because we can, I don't need anything from them. And I think one of the first things a pastor can do is, when these kind of people come through, is try to leverage them for your good, when really we should just serve them in every way we can. So one of my rules is I never ask anything from them. I don't ask for favors. I don't ask for seats. I don't ask for special treatment. Let me just serve you. And I think that makes them feel protected and safe. But I do think at times, there does need to be a measure of, hey, we're going to open this door so you don't have to walk through the hallway and let 100 people stop you for an autograph. So we do serve them in that way. And it's not special treatment. It's like what you said. It's just providing a space for them to be able to come to church, worship God. And now our church is kind of used to it. They know those people are there, and they really, I think they honor it very, very well. And no one's pulling on them or asking for pictures. So I think it's just creating a safe space. And the key is just not asking anything from them, just only want something for them.
That's really good. I like that. Describe, if you could, before we pivot from sports into your journey and your book, what it's like on a weekend in the fall at the Church of the Highlands, while Alabama and Auburn are battling every week. And this year, Alabama won another national championship. And I was just in Tuscaloosa. I want to say it was in the end of February. So it wasn't football season. And yet it still felt like football was the dominant sport, just walking around Tuscaloosa, getting ready to speak at a church or something. So what is that like in the fall? I have to imagine. And I don't know if you have Saturday services. I'm guessing you don't.
No.
So coming in on a Sunday after, Alabama and Auburn or whatever, what is that like in the fall? Just describe it.
In fact, most churches like ours have Saturday services, and I'm not even sure I could get my staff there in the fall. So it's big. When I say it's big, Jason, it's huge. We jokingly say an atheist in Alabama is somebody who doesn't believe in Bear Bryant. So it's a big deal here, and somewhat teetering on the line of being a god, actually. So it's very, very worshipped and loved. And so, no, it is all in, and these people are intense. And in fact, when I have guest speakers who come to our church, they always think it's funny to talk about what school they go to, and even maybe sometimes make a jab at Alabama or Auburn. And I tell them, look, it won't work. Don't do it. They're very serious about this here. So No, the fans are great. It's college football is everything, and I love it too. I'm a Saturday fan. I don't get obsessed with it throughout the week, but on Saturday it would look like it means everything to me as well. In fact, I have to discipline myself on Saturdays when LSU is playing, not to scream at the TV so much, so I'm too hoarse to preach the next morning. So,
Right.
it's a challenge, and they're definitely all in kind of fans, but I love them. I mean, I think there's nothing better than college sports.
A quick break again to tell you about our Sports Spectrum magazine. $18 for an entire year subscription. $18. That's it. Super cheap, and you can get it at sportspectrum.com. Our magazine is, to me, maybe the best thing that we do here at the Ministry of Sports Spectrum. It's an actual print edition that you can get in your hands and use as a great resource to go through some stories, maybe with a team, with a men's group. The magazine's great that way. It also has devotionals inside the back of the magazine, wonderful stories, more in-depth stories in the written form than you can get here on the podcast. But there's also a digital edition as well that comes for free if you order the magazine. Now, it's $18 for a one-year subscription, a quarterly magazine, so you get 4 issues plus a couple bonus issues. But then if you order for 2 years, so you get a 2-year subscription, it's only $30. So it's $15 a year. And it's a great magazine. I'm telling you, when you get this magazine, you'll be like, my goodness, this is top quality. It's not cheesy, I promise you. And it will make for a great resource for you. Maybe it's a gift that you want to get someone for a birthday or even, a holiday or something like that. The Sports Spectrum magazine, I'm telling you, it's a great resource. You can order today at sportspectrum.com, the website. When you get there, click the magazine icon and order your Sports Spectrum magazine subscription, a 1-year for $18 or a 2-year for just $30. You can do it right now at sportspectrum.com. He is Chris Hodges, the senior pastor at Church of the Highlands in Alabama, and he's got a new book, Out of the Cave, Stepping into the Light When Depression Darkens What You See. It released in May of 2021. We're so glad to have Chris here on Sports Spectrum. Let's talk about your journey a little bit. That will commence with the release of this book. When did you realize God was calling you as a pastor into ministry?
Yeah, that was actually, I was a sophomore. Well, it was between my sophomore and junior year at LSU when the church hired me as a summer intern to help out with the summer camps and do some of the youth ministry things. And that's where I got bit by the ministry bug, I call it. I knew I found what I was called to do. The dilemma was I was an accounting major, which is my dad's field of work, and I was kind of following in his footsteps. And so I went back for my junior year at LSU, and honestly, I was not going to do very well. My heart was now in another place. And so grateful that my dad had the wisdom and the grace to be able to say, I see something on you. And he blessed me actually transferring from LSU to a local Bible college. And I actually finished my accounting degree later in my 20s, but just because I wanted to complete it. But yeah, it was at 20 years old. So I'm 58 now. So I've been doing this for 38 years, a long time now. So, and I love ministry. It's all I've ever known.
When did the idea to start a church like Church of the Highlands come into place? You said it was 2000. I think you kind of alluded to it earlier, going through some depression and some time there. But when does that idea kind of conceive where, yeah, I'm in ministry, but it's one thing to be in ministry. It's another thing to be a senior pastor and find a church and plant a church. When does that come into play?
So yeah, 1999 was a bad year, and I won't get into the details, but and not worse than most people's bad year, but it was just a bad year. But in 2020, I was depressed. And I'm not a depressed kind of a person. In fact, I was always very critical of people who were depressed. I was like, snap out of it, man. Let's just go. Just choose to be happy. And honestly, Jason, it's not that easy. Because you don't even know how you got there, much less know the way out, which is why I use the metaphor of the cave as the feeling for depression, because there is a way out. You just can't find it. It's just dark and disorienting. And that's where I was at. And it was in 2000 that we were in this prayer effort that I talked about earlier, that I really felt like I saw and had hope, which I truly believe, both clinically and spiritually, by the way, this has been proven. So it's in the Bible, and it's psychologists and psychiatrists will tell you that fresh vision or fresh purpose or a new assignment, however you want to word it, is one of the greatest ways to come out of a season of depression. And so I felt like I got this new assignment to start a church back in a season of America's history where there really church planting wasn't a thing.
Right.
Now it's pretty popular. In fact, we helped start a church planting organization to help serve church planters. And we planted now more than 960 churches across America.
That's great.
So to step out on that, he was really truly a step of faith. Back in 2000, we started our church in February of 2001, and 400 people showed up in the very first service. And today we're, perhaps one of the largest churches in the nation. And it's just been an amazing story, but it literally almost instantaneously pulled me out of that season of depression.
Why was that? Because you just saw a passion happening, that you were so passionate about it. You saw God kind of directing your steps, as it says in Proverbs, to clearly walk in. Why was it something that kind of pulled you out when you look back?
Yeah, it's the power of a dream. And the Bible talks a lot about, when it encourages us to dream big dreams for God, and then your mouths will be filled with laughter, your tongues will songs with joy. There's something about it. And psychiatrists and psychologists have confirmed this. In fact, one of the greatest studies was done by a guy named Viktor Frankl, who wrote the bestseller, Man's Search for Meaning. Most people know that he was actually treating post-Holocaust Jewish patients in a hospital in Vienna. And he actually came into contrast with Freud's theory that life is all about pleasure. That's what Freud was saying. And Frankl says, no, it's not. Life is all about meaning. And if you don't have meaning, you'll dull your life with pleasure. And so he created what he called logotherapy. And logotherapy included three things. It says that people need meaningful work, you need to do something that actually has meaning attached to it. You need to do it with a community of friends. And then you need to learn the art of taking whatever suffering you've experienced and use it to help other people. Well, all of he says he discovered that, but truthfully, all those principles are biblical principles. All these are principles that God has a plan for your life. That where there is no vision, people perish. So God's been saying this for a long time, and he always puts us in a group of people because we're always better together. And the Bible is full of teachings of, hey, God turns bad things around for the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So this is something the Bible's been saying for thousands of years that psychiatrists and psychologists have found, and that's what I discovered. So really, it was having meaningful work with a group of people and take my suffering and now use it, write a book to help others, will pull you out of the cave.
Is meaningful work and purposeful work the same thing? When you think, I hear that word a lot about purpose. I've used it too, like finding your calling, your purpose. Is that similar? Is that the same thing, or is it different?
Yeah, let's define it. It's the same thing, but let me define it a little more deeply. It doesn't just fulfill you; it helps others. Right. So it's not about making more money. It's not about attaining. In fact, Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, he discovered this. They discovered, in fact, in the first draft of the 5 needs that he said are the highest needs, he thought the highest one was what he called self-actualization. And self-actualization means, your team wins the championship, you get the car you want, you have the wife you want, you have the house you want, you win. Yeah. And they discovered that's not the highest. They have now rewritten or added to those basic 5 needs to an expanded 8 needs. And the highest now is what they call transcendence. And transcendence is you're living a life beyond yourself. You're living your life in a way that impacts others. And for Christians, I believe that means we're living our lives in a way that also impacts eternity. So we're doing things, we're giving toward things, we're serving in such a way that will impact heaven, and not just this life here on this earth.
That's really good. Out of the Cave is the title of the book. You've mentioned about the metaphor of the cave. Why write this book right now, right? Because that was 20 years ago that you talked about your own battle with depression. But here we are in 2021. And I even thinking about the last couple of years and some friends of mine, people who are in ministry, pastors who unfortunately have succumbed to depression. Why now though? Is it because of where we are in the state of this world and all that we went through last year?
Well, no, actually, I think it's the wisdom of God, because it was released this year and I was completing the manuscript in spring of last year. Right. So I think only God knew that it would be needed like it would be needed right now, because mean, the mental health hotlines went up 900% last year. So it's 1 out of 4 young people considered suicide in 2020. That's a CDC number. So it's a serious issue. But my journey actually began with the book in 2018, when, as you said, some pastors succumbed to their depression, had taken their own lives. I didn't know them personally, but it impacted me like I did know them. I remember the week that I read this last article about this young pastor in California, and I thought, I need to speak to this. And in all these years of ministry, Jason, I'd never preached a message on depression. Can you believe? So I did a week's worth of study, which was not nearly enough. But I brought a message after just a week's worth of study out of the life of Elijah to our congregation. And it became the most rewatched message times a lot, maybe 100.
Wow.
So, wow. And then I knew I hit a nerve. And then I spoke at a pastor's conference, about 4,000 pastors there. Taylor made the message to a pastor's conference, same response. And I thought, you know what, if this is this big a deal, why don't I spend some time and study it and to see if a book can come out of it? So I actually did 2 years of writing and study and finished the manuscript right in the middle of a pandemic when I was kind of experiencing it for the second time in the year 2020 myself.
Yeah, I think all of us had some sort of like, I don't know, rewiring of our brain a little bit to think about because we're not built for isolation. And that's what we had to do. People were telling us, you need to stay home. You cannot go here. You cannot go there. You cannot gather with friends. Churches, of course. I mean, we could spend another podcast talking about how you adjusted to having church in 2020, but that's just not how we're wired, right? We're wired for community.
Yeah, I'll never forget the first day that I heard the phrase social distancing. And I thought, I know what they mean, but that's the wrong phrase.
Yeah.
Because what we needed was physical distancing, but actually we needed to be more socially connected than ever before. And I hated it. I knew, I think, my goodness, we're getting ready to go into a season of isolation. And this is the time we better learn the art of checking on one another and staying connected, even though we're physically distancing while we figure out what this virus is doing to people. And so I write an entire chapter because it's one of the major causes of depression is isolation and loneliness. And in fact, I used the life of Elijah throughout the study of depression. And the first thing that he did wrong, the Bible says, is he left his servant there. So he decided to take his own depression journey alone, and it didn't get better. It got worse. And so it is a condition we're in. Most studies say we're the loneliest society in human history. That our species, and of course, I don't consider us literally a species, but to speak their language, our species was designed to herd and to do things together and to operate in that kind of a way. So it is a huge deal.
The loneliest time ever, and yet we're more connected. I mean, ever, in the sense of technology. I mean, the fact that you and I can do this interview over a Zoom call, and you're in Alabama and I'm in Connecticut, is great. But we're the loneliest and yet most connected in our history. It doesn't sound like that should make sense.
Yeah, because we think we're connected. We call it, the social connections. It's really not very social. It's very, very lonely. More people are spending more time alone than they ever have in human history.
So sad to hear that. We have a lot of athletes and coaches that listen to this show. And I know that anxiety and depression going into that cave is a real thing for so many in the sports world too. And some have spoken out about it. I think it's becoming more of a conversation starter, and that's a good thing. But what would your encouragement be to them? If a coach is listening, if a player, an athlete's listening, maybe it's a parent of somebody who's going through it that happens to be an athlete, what would your encouragement be to them? A place maybe even just to start?
Yeah, so most people, especially people that are well-known, like an athlete or any a business person or someone who has, achieved any type of success, the higher you go, so to speak, the less you actually involve other people in your life. And that's a trap. So what psychologists call it, they call it ruminating. So what you now end up doing is you're in self-talk. So you're not processing with others, you're processing with yourselves. And they call it ruminating because that's what a cow does. A cow chews the grass, swallows it, regurgitates it, chews it some more, swallows it, regurgitates it, chews it some more. Well, every time it comes back up, it doesn't get better, it gets worse.
Right.
And so do our thoughts. So the more you chew it, like, give me some time to think about this. That's nothing wrong at a surface level, but the more you do that, the more you ruminate and you bring it back up, it's not coming back up, Jason, in a better condition. It's coming back up in a worse condition. And now we actually begin to create things that aren't even true. And that's where people actually, I personally believe it's the most dangerous place. So now you're alone in your thoughts and you're in self-talk and you're your own counselor and you're also distraught for some reason or going through some type of depression. And that's when people many times succumb to this condition because they talk themselves into something they've literally believed a lie about the problem and about the solution.
Yes, Chris Hodges. The book again is called Out of the Cave. Lisa Turkers, who's an author and speaker who I really admire, says every believer should own this book, if not for themselves, then to help someone they love. And that's such a great reminder, Chris, I think, right now, that even if you aren't personally battling depression, that you probably know someone who is battling right now. And that's why it's important, I think, to not just, if you're listening to this and you might think, well, I'm fine, I feel fine. Well, you probably know someone who's going through it, right?
No, exactly. In fact, in chapter 3, I created 2 lists of what not to say to someone who is depressed, and then what it will be helpful to someone who's depressed. So all of us know someone. In fact, last year, I had one of my pastor friends, I got the call from who now is his widow. I was the first one she called, and she says, "You're never going to believe this, but my precious husband just took his own life." Of course, she was very distraught, crying over the phone.
Yeah.
And we all know someone who's going through this. If 1 out of 4 young people, and by the way, 1 out of 10 of the rest of us are having these kind of thoughts, and we all had last year. Last year affected all of us. 2020 affected all of us in some kind of a way negatively. Everything bad is up, unfortunately. So this is the time, even if it's not for something that you need for yourself, this would be a great time to be educated on this topic. So this entire chapter I wrote called Removing the Stigma, that we have to get comfortable talking about this, something that's become, something that we've like, oh, wow, that's what you're dealing with. And we kind of stay away from that topic, or sometimes even from those people. The more we remove that stigma and learn how to have the right kind of conversations, I think we're going to see this thing improve.
Yeah, I hope so. And people can get the book Out of the Cave. It's going to be a great resource to help others. Like I said, those going through it, but also those who know someone who's going through it. Last question, Chris. And we ask this question to all of our guests. I'm curious what your answer might be. What's God showing you and teaching you today? What's he, everybody has something that the Lord impresses upon their heart. I think each day we learn something new from God. But today, as we talk here, what is God teaching you and showing you?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a set of books and preparing some messages just on the topic of decisions. That I think too many times we allow circumstances to dictate how we are, when really we have choices we can make and decisions we can make. And we can live our lives internally instead of externally. And I deeply respect people who can go through difficult times and their attitude stays strong, their family stays strong, their marriage stays strong. But really what they've done is they've learned the art of making choices and not allowing emotions and circumstances to dictate their life. And so I think it's one of the biggest things that people can learn the art of in order to have a successful life.
Well, we're thankful you made the decision to say yes to our request to come on our show, Chris. This was a lot of fun talking sports, certainly. And it's a really important topic with your book, Out of the Cave, that people can go get now everywhere books are found. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll get to meet in person someday. And maybe we'll tape another podcast. Who knows? But thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it, Jason. Thanks so much.
And many thanks to Chris Hodges, the senior pastor of Church of the Highlands in Alabama. That was an important discussion to have. We haven't really gone too deep into things like depression on this show, but a lot of people are going through it. And I thought it was important to have Chris on. Plus, he's just a really wise individual, person who pastors a church with a lot of people, and glad that he's a huge sports fan as well and connected to clearly a lot of people in the sports world. So just appreciate Chris for being here on the show today. Great guy. And I hope his book continues to help people in a real powerful way. Books are one thing when you write them, but I believe certain books can be used as resources for people to give to other people when they're going through something. And this book Out of the Cave is one of those books. So go pick it up everywhere books are found. And thanks again to Chris for being here today on Sports Spectrum. We also appreciate you tuning in as well. It means so much when you guys hit that play button, when you check our show out, really, because we're just trying to bring Jesus back into the sports conversation. That's all. We want to see his name glorified. We want to see us decrease and him increase, right? Like it says in John 3:30. That is the whole essence of our ministry at Sports Spectrum. He must increase, we must decrease. So do us a favor, if you could, share this with someone. Let them know about Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith. Let them know about this podcast. Maybe even this conversation with Chris Hodges needs to be shared with someone that you know who's going through a difficult period in their life right now. And when I say share it, just text them the link. Really, that's the easiest way. You can also direct them, or you could check out our website as well, sportspectrum.com, for all of our content. It's right there, and it's all free at the website, sportspectrum.com. Thanks for tuning in. We love you guys. We hope you'll join us next time right here on Sports Spectrum, and have a great rest of your day. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.